OWS fam, the Sharp Football Analysis Nation. We are back for another episode of Searching for Ceiling. You know the deal by now. We're live every Friday at noon Eastern. Before we get into today, you probably noticed by just my intro, hearing me talk, I am severely under the weather. I don't know, severely, whatever. I'm sick, dude. And so I'm going to try my best to keep the coughs to a minimum or off the microphone. And we might see me ducking out for a minute to blow my nose. So with that intro here, we're leaving a week 10 where we were talking a lot about the fact that the median game total was higher than we had seen in some time, and you were likely to need some increase in pointage in raw points to ship GPPs. Fast forward now to week 11, and the median game total is back down to where an area of kind of where we got used to seeing over the previous 4 or 5 weeks. So what does that mean from a theoretical perspective, and where do we find ceiling? Welcome to Searching for Ceiling.
1 week season.
There he is, the man, the myth, the legend, the Rich Hribar. How are we doing today, man?
We're doing good. It's dreary day. I'm sad that you're down and under the weather here. Hopefully you start feeling better. We gotta pump you up full of orange juice.
I know, man. I know. It's like right before the holiday week. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah, get it out of your system now before.
Yeah, exactly.
Before Thanksgiving.
No rest for the wicked, man. You know how we do it. We are here in them streets. How was your week last week before we get into this week?
It was solid. I was mostly in on like a lot of the plays that got there, but definitely had a lot of share of like where the ownership went. I was actually bummed that the Amon-Ra stuff ended up getting as high as it did through the Jamar Chase back injury stuff,
especially in high dollar. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was high on Amon-Ra like early in the week last week, and I was just like honed in on him. So we'll see where we can skate to this week.
Yeah, I actually last week I had my first real sweat of the season. Came in the 555 milli. I got up to 19th at one point, so we were pushing. I ended up getting 50th after some late game stuff. But it was my real first big sweat of the season. We've had some smaller sweats, but that was in the milli, and that was exciting. So we're looking to run it back here. I don't know if I'm going to make it into the 444 milli this week. I typically like the higher dollar millis, but that one's a little bit of a stretch, and I whiffed on trying to win a seat this week. So we'll see kind of how we handle this week. But talking about this week, dude, I mentioned the fact that like our median game totals are down compared to last week. That was important distinction last week, knowing that the median game totals. And what does that mean? Like the game totals across the slate were higher than we had been used to, which theoretically meant we probably needed to score more points to ship a GPP. We kind of saw that. We did have the outlier week right before that where a single game stack in the Bengals and the Houston Texans. That was 2 weeks ago, right? Can't even remember.
Last week.
That was last week. Who did the Houston Texans play? The Buccaneers.
The Bucs.
That's right. That the overstack of that game returned like a 250 score to ship GPPs, but we talked about how we were likely to need more points. Now we move forward to this week. Are we still in this realm of like we need to score 240 plus? Are we back into the 220s, 230s here?
Yeah, I definitely think the latter when you look at just the layout for games, that maybe we will see a couple games get there, but we don't have like a lot of those premier game environments this week. We have one that's going to be popular and draw like a ton of ownership across the board, but it's a lot of one-sided stuff. Which isn't like the greatest of slates.
So let's talk about that. There's maybe a secondary in that discussion, probably the Cardinals and the Texans. Were you referring to that game?
Who I was referring to.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about that one first then. What are you seeing from that spot? I'll just kind of give you the floor here.
Yeah, we've seen now, like from a game environment stance, though, like the Cardinals getting Kyler Murray back turned out to just be like more of a functional team, right? Like a team that we can count on maybe having more counter punch instead of just getting flooded on the other side. They had their most yards per play in a game since week 3. They scored their most points since week 3. 65% of their offensive yardage came via passing. It was their second highest rate in a game of the season. So with just them having more of a functional passing attack, It gives us more opportunity here for this to be a game and go back and forth. And we had talked about it last week. I mean, this Houston pass defense has not been particularly good, and we did see some of the touchdown regression go to the wide receivers a little bit. They should have gave up a third touchdown. Mr. Tyler Boyd can squeeze that last one. But they have been a team that has gotten really leaky. Over the past 5 games, we've seen, Desmond Ridder, Derek Carr, and Baker Mayfield all be QB1s against Houston to go at Joe Burrow, who obviously is in a different tier than those guys. And Kyler Murray is a tier above those first 3 guys that I rattled off for fantasy football. So with just Kyler Murray being back and being functional, it gives us a pipeline for this game to have more upside than it probably would have. And no disrespect to Josh Dobbs and what he's doing. I don't want to shade the America's favorite quarterback right now.
Yeah, no shade. That's an interesting too. And living in Arizona, watching the end of that game last week, I was like, are we really pushing for a game-winning field goal, having the inside track to the number 1 overall pick? And apparently, like, the Cardinals are just trying to figure out their way, which I guess makes sense from the sense of, hey, we have a new coaching staff, we have new players, let's see what we have moving forward. But to me, it was a little shocking that they're appears to be so easily foregoing a top 3 overall pick. I mean, they're still within that discussion now, but with the way that they kind of handled that game environment, that game plan, to me, that's a good thing for DFS purposes, as we talked about. But it was very, very interesting. We'll just leave it at that. That this team is is leaning forward in the way that they are. But that, like we said, is a good thing for us, at least for DFS purposes. So when you talk about the presence of Kyler Murray, what he is able to do, the fact that he's no longer this, like, I'm going to see designed run plays called for him. He's more of an escape artist, and we kind of saw that last week. We talked a lot about that last season when the field was kind of the talk of the town last year, early season DFS, was, can I play Kyler Murray naked? It's like, well, he's not getting these designed run plays really anymore. He's more of an escapability quarterback that kind of puts him in the Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes type tier where, yeah, they have rushing upside, but it's coming from extending the play, mobile in the pocket, and being able to get his eyes downfield. So that is not very projectable, we'll say, from week to week, but it does introduce upside to this game environment, which is the important piece. We're going to see a lot of ownership from this spot. So are there any interesting guys that are going overlooked, or you think that there's interesting ways to play this spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see, the core of this game through CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, Devin Singletary, assuming that Dameon Pierce doesn't practice again today, who has not practiced all week. Those 3 guys with the Trey McBride bring back kind of be like the most popular approach you see gamers attacking this game. I think you'll see, potential pump plays and Michael Wilson and Rondell Moore. Hollywood Brown is probably the most intriguing guy because the narrative around Hollywood Brown, if he catches that touchdown pass that Kyler Murray sailed on him, is probably a lot different than, coming into this week than where it is now. Now you look on the surface, you're like, oh, he was 4th on the team in targets, had his 5th straight game not going over 50 yards receiving. But there's going to be very few games, I think, where he actually is 4th in that pecking order in targets. Yeah. People will look at, I think, like the overall points allowed that Houston is allowed to wide receivers and maybe be turned off. But we talked about it last week with that game. Like, it's really weird that Houston has like this great run defense, but they keep giving up rushing touchdowns to kind of boost their things. And then they have this like kind of shoddy pass defense, but don't give up touchdowns to wide receivers. And I kind of highlight, I was like, I think it's going to reverse. It's going to, like, this, if they keep giving up this much efficiency to wide receivers, we're going to see a course correction. And like I said, there should have been 3 receiving touchdowns in that game. So there is touchdown potential here too, I think, for Hollywood. So at his price, I think he's a guy that maybe is just in limbo. Maybe people want to pay down. We don't have a lot of clear pay down receivers this week either. So it might force some guys that go to Rondale, go to Michael Wilson, to maybe go to Robert Woods if Noah Brown ends up being out of this game, or, anyone gets gross with like Jalen Guyton. But we don't have a lot of those great pay down receivers this week.
Yeah. And that is gross. We'll just put a final cap on that. Jalen Guyton is gross. Anyway, we move on. We digress. The Kyler Murray is expected to get ownership. Rondell Moore is expected to get ownership. Trey McBride is expected to be the most owned singular player on the slate. So when we talk about the fact that like there is still a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty with this offense, we have one game sample size of this, how this offense is going to run with Kyler Murray. And while it included a neutral to positive pass rate over expectation, there's no telling kind of how they're viewing this spot. Yes, the matchup does point to the air. But when we look at kind of what we've seen from the Cardinals this season, they have been extremely hit or miss with game planning, with game management, and that Kyler Murray is not singularly going to fix all of that just from being on the field. Like, yes, he helps this offense and he benefits this game environment, but there is a very, very interesting case to be made that the field is expressing more certainty than is available in this spot. How do I see theoretically handling that situation? Well, we could go Kyler Murray doubles. It's very easy to do so. And playing with kind of what those pieces are, I think Marquise Brown is a very, very good piece to include. We also saw 0 running back targets last week from this Arizona Cardinals defense, or from this Arizona Cardinals offense. Is that something you expect? I mean, we're looking at historical numbers here. Kyler Murray has never really targeted running backs and tight ends at a high rate, but we saw him target Trey McBride 9 times last week. Is this sticky? Is this noise? How do you picture James Conner in particular with a pass game role here?
Yeah, we saw this a little bit too with James Conner last year before Kyler got hurt. His splits with and without Kyler. He took off for fantasy football after Kyler was injured. He's only caught 3 passes since week 1, anyways. Like Josh Dobbs wasn't targeting him either. So that's kind of a problem. It's like this. It's a real good matchup for Houston. Obviously, he is like one of those traditional like in a leverage spot. But like it takes like I don't know if we're gonna get rushing efficiency and we're gonna get receptions. And like even if we get a like the Joe Mixon scenario, even if we get a touchdown, like can we get there with James Conner?
Yeah.
That's kind of the concern I have with going that way, because I can see how a lot of people can get there, right? And obviously people will look at the raw points allowed. Houston's allowed to running backs, but under the hood, they've been a really great run defense. So
yeah,
with him not catching a lot of passes, I think it makes it really hard to see like a path to like a really tournament winning upside, and like maybe more he just, if he scores, I think it just wrecks the other guys. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it makes the other guys worse instead of making himself a great play.
Yeah, he came back from injured reserve, played 63% of the offensive snaps, saw 16, 17 opportunities, can't remember exactly, somewhere in there, with 0 targets. So again, and we're expecting Emari Demercado coming back. Is that likely to influence James Conner? Probably not, because this team has shown us that they want to use a unquestioned lead back type setup. We're likely to see, I mean, they played with Keontae Ingram and Tony Jones last week.
They also have Michael Carter.
They did go out and get Michael Carter. That is an interesting note as well. I would be interested to see if he's active this week. In his first week, typically we've seen teams around the league this year kind of give new players that they've acquired a week. I mean, we saw it with Donovan Peoples-Jones. We saw it with a couple other guys around the league.
With Cam
Akers. So I don't know. There's my point here is there's a lot of ambiguity with this Arizona Cardinals team. And to me, the presence of Kyler, what they did last week, the tendencies that they showed us, not keeling over and dying for the rest of the season, they're actually going to play football and figure out like what they have moving forward. All of that kind of comes together to me, as opposed to saying like, I want to bet on the Cardinals. It just makes me want to bet on the Houston Texans more. And I think the most interesting piece to do that, or the clear and away best on paper play here, is Tank Dell. And right now, current projections seems to be like everyone's buying into the Cardinals because of everything we talked about, but not realizing that like there's still some level of ambiguity here and definite uncertainties. So if I can get like Tank Dell at 15-ish% ownership, while the field is jumping all over Trey McBride at like 30%, and Rondale Moore, who has like a negative ADOT, he doesn't. I'm just using it to highlight a point here. And plays 60% of the offensive snaps. If that's what the field is going to buy into, it's very clear to me, just like play the best play from this game, which is very clearly Tank Dell. Yes, Nico Collins is coming back. We expect Noah Brown. There's some uncertainty there, but he missed both practices Wednesday and Thursday. We'll see what they get out of the practice report today. But it currently looks like Noah Brown is going to miss. So we should see Nico Collins, Tank Dell in their standard 85-ish percent route snap rate. They are suboptimal from a route participation perspective, but we've seen what these guys are doing against zone coverage, which is important because the Cardinals are in zone coverage at a top 5 rate this season. So is that something that you're interested? Are you looking at Nico Collins? Are you looking at CJ Stroud maybe from this game environment? Tank Dell. What about Dalton Schultz in what has become a difficult matchup for tight ends here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Houston side's by far the best side to play through here, anyways.
Yeah.
We'll see too. I mean, I think Devin Singletary, by the time we get to Sunday, his projected ownership is going to be significantly higher than where it is right now.
And it's already almost 30%.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be like the clear core running back piece because of where he's priced on both sides. I mean, you can keep going back to CJ Stroud. I mean, we're beyond the point of calling CJ Stroud's season like a successful rookie season. Like, he's having a great season for in the context of any quarterback right now.
Yeah.
Like, third in the NFL in yards per pass attempt. Arizona does not pressure the quarterback at all. We've talked about it ad nauseum on this show. Like, they're a completely passive defense. They're going to play zone coverage. They don't blitz. They're 28th in pressure rate. CJ Stroud is second in the NFL in passing touchdowns when he hasn't been pressured this season. Second in the NFL in yards per pass attempt. Anytime Tank Dell's been on the field, he's been the lead wide receiver. When he has been on the field, he has 27.3% of the team targets. The next closest player is at 15.8%. Obviously, that sample includes Nico Collins missing time, but on snaps with Tank Dell and Nico Collins on the field together, Tank Dell also still has a team high 23% of the team targets. Like, he has been the lead wide receiver in this offense when he's on the field. Arizona's definitely been a completely beatable, secondary for us to target. So yeah, I think that the Houston side is by far the best thing to play. I don't know, so it's not so much that like Arizona is like a great tight end play, or great against defending tight ends. It's that they're just giving up so many points to running backs and wide receivers that like I'm scared off of it. If you do play Dalton Schultz, that's kind of like one of the things. But the one thing that note about Dalton Schultz, though, that kind of has gone overlooked over like his stretch is the return of Laremy Tunsil. With Laremy Tunsil sidelined, Dalton Schultz was only running a route on 64% of the team dropbacks. But now with Tunsil back on the field, he's not needed so much to be as in line as a blocker or be helped out. And he's running a pass route on 81.2% of the dropbacks with Tunsil on the field. That's a significant gap and gives him just more opportunities. So I don't want to run away from Schultz just because like Arizona's not giving a lot of points to tight ends. It's just like they're just giving up points to the other positions.
Yeah, there's a couple things there. I think there is some schematical significance with Arizona's kind of clamps on tight ends. And I think it has to do with how shallow their safeties are playing. I mean, they're kind of clogging the middle of the field. That's why we've seen production on motion and crossing routes because they're heavy zone rates. But as you see that come through the middle of the field, you see it expand. But they start with a very, very bunched formation over the middle of the field. So we're seeing a lot over the perimeter. We're seeing a lot on deep crossing routes. Your 7 to 9s that are have a cross the field component in that route. They're getting kind of burned in that. So that kind of that's Nico Collins and Tank Dell from what we've seen usage wise. Something very interesting to me. Both Nico Collins and Tank Dell rank top 18 in the league in fantasy points per route run against zone coverage, with Nico Collins edging out the rookie there, 0.46 fantasy points per route run versus zone. Tank Dell's right on his heels at 0.43. So these guys are both successful against zone coverage, and I think they are going to give this Arizona Cardinals defense fits. You also mentioned the return of Laremy Tunsil, and what I saw last week is having both George Fant and Laremy Tunsil on the field is allowing Bobby Slowick to run some very interesting formations, personnel groupings, and plays, both on the ground and through the air. What really stuck out to me last week was Dalton Schultz lined up in line. He was then, it's called a motion, but he was brought into like this, like kind of, I don't even know what to call it. It's like not pistol, not shotgun. It was like this weird 2 yards behind where he had lined up in line. So he was like 2 yards behind the right tackle in George Fant. And then he motioned to the other side of the formation. And what he ended up doing is he down blocked out of that motion. And this was a run play. And it was very, very interesting. The run play went to the left off tackle. And what it allowed Laramie Tunzel to do is pull. So you have the tight end coming down to down block the defensive end. And you have Laramie Tunzel, who is a big boy, out in the open field blocking for a Devin Singletary runoff tackle. And that was very, very interesting run usage and concept to me. And kind of goes back to like what we've talked about on the show as far as Bobby Slowick. We were like, yeah, Slowick first
The
month of the
Shanahan
season.
tree.
Yeah, we were like, yeah, Slowick first month of the season. Second month of the season, we were like, Slowick, what are you doing? You have all this, like, you have this insane first down rush rate. What we saw last week is actually they ran the football on first down 22 times. If you add the Hutchinson end around jet sweep type thing they did, that was 23 times on first down. They had 12 first down passes. So a week after we lauded Bobby Slowick for his 19 first down pass attempts, he kind of came back to this, we're going to run the football on first down. The difference is Laramie Tunzel being back, and those unique concepts were effective. I mean, they had 100, Devin Singletary had 114 first down rush yards last
Yeah,
week.
we don't care if you run it a lot on first down if you're running it well.
If it's, yeah, he had one negative rush play on first down. One. You look back to when Laramie Tunzel was hurt, you look back to when Dameon Pierce was in there, that was a much higher rate in runs that went for 3 yards or less or negative. So the fact that they have the ability now with their bodies, their big bodies up front, to be this kind of will keep you off balance type run team is okay to me that they had this elevated first down rush rate last week. So just a bunch of interesting things that I pulled out of their game last week. I've obviously been paying a lot of attention to Bobby Slowick this season. So watching all their games and figuring out kind of what he's doing. But to me, this spot, I think JM put this the best, most succinct way possible. Yes, you can run against the Arizona Cardinals. They're around, league average, but you can most definitely pass against them. So it'll be interesting to see for me. And God, we've spent 23 minutes on this first game. It'll be interesting for me to see how Bobby Slowick attacks this game. I think CJ Stroud doubles with Nico Collins, who's coming in under 3% ownership, and Tank Dell are the most interesting to me. I think you can bring it back and not worry about the ownership with a guy like Trey McBride, a guy like Marquise Brown. You can do some interesting things from that base. But that, to me, it starts with the Houston side here. I love the passing game because all the ownership is expected to go to Devin Singletary. But again, this is a guy who has 3 career games now of over 100 yards. So take that for what it's worth. I was on Singletary last week. I don't think I will be this week. Any last minute, by the way, is on that game environment?
No, I think it's okay to take as much time as you did because there's so many individual pieces they're going to have like relative like interest in this game regardless. Like, so even outside from like a game stacking upside stance where we're talking about like, is this the game you have to have like 2 weeks ago, Bucks versus Texans, just versus the individual pieces. This is where just a lot of the ownership is going to be on this slate period.
Yeah, 100%. Pulling up the game totals here. We obviously have the Miami Dolphins who are expected to score a heap ton of points here against the Raiders. Very, very clear run funnel matchup. We'll talk about that here shortly. You've got a divisional tilt here between the Bears and the Lions. I want to talk about that one here shortly. And then you're down to this Arizona Cardinals, Houston Texans game we talked about. Chargers, Packers. I don't know if we'll have enough time to get to this one, but there's some interesting components at bare minimum to talk about there. And then really down here to the Seahawks and the Rams, who have historically played to more muted game environments. So with that, kick you out there. With that out of the way, which one of those games are you kind of looking at as a secondary option on this slate?
Yeah, it's interesting because like from like a game stance, like obviously I think Miami on their own side is very interesting. On the Raiders side, we still have there's so much unknown for the Antonio Pierce experience because they played the Giants and the Jets the last 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Like,
and they haven't seen a negative game environment yet.
no,
That.
and like we've seen this story from like the Antonio Pierce side of it like a lot of times, right? Where you get like the interim head coach takes over for a guy that like literally everyone wanted out of the building, but has like this throwback mentality, right? Like, like wants to run the football, wants to like, not modernize the game, but like I don't know if Antonio Pierce necessarily has like the right proper answers in like the current like NFL meta. And we'll see. Like I might take that all back, but he hasn't been put in that spot yet. So, but the fact that he has just literally faced the Giants and Jets and just said we're just going to hand it off to Josh Jacobs, we don't care what happens per play, puts me in puts this game in a fragile spot. I don't know. We did at least see him pump targets to Devontae Adams to kind of make that interesting if we get the game environment. I think probably Michael Mayer becomes the most interesting component to me in this game, because if they have to throw and where he's priced, and considering where like the ownership on this slate's going to go to Trey McBride and maybe Dalton Kincaid, like at his pricing, maybe he becomes interesting. He did have a season high route participation, caught a touchdown. The matchup is good. The Dolphins have not been good against tight ends. So maybe Michael Mayer is like the most intriguing piece if they have to throw here. But everything is on the Dolphins side. Look at every Dolphins home game this year. Like they've scored 31 or more points every single game at home. They have faced two teams this year that allow more rushing yards per game to running backs. And the Raiders are 30th in the NFL in that department. In those two games, the Miami Dolphins backfield against the Carolina Panthers combined for 194 yards and four touchdowns, and the Denver Broncos game, which obviously they had 441 yards and 7 touchdowns, which I can't even say with a straight face because
as one does.
I mean, 441 yards in your backfield, 7 touchdowns. We're getting David Achane back, or Devin Achane back, and we have Raheem Mostert with his touchdown equity. And like what's crazy about, because typically you would say we have two big guys that they know like it's going to be a 50-50 backfield split, which makes it tough, right? Like for DFS gamers, but it's like we kind of don't care, right? Like we kind of don't care that it's a 50 backfield split. Like it's really weird to say that out loud because it shouldn't be a thing that exists. But when you're talking about like this scheme, this backfield, this matchup, and the per play upside that both of those running backs have, they still can get there.
Yeah, 100%. And I bring up Raheem Mostert because it's an interesting talking point here that he's kind of settled into this like 12 to 14 running back opportunity range over the previous 3 weeks. And that was with Achane out. So does Achane's return do anything to move the needle in a positive way for that expected workload? Probably not. I mean, yes, they played some more superior rush defenses in the Eagles, the Patriots, and the Chiefs here. But this is still an interesting discussion point. He's priced at 6,900 here. I mean, even Achane at 6,600 here. And he has a career high of 18 or 22 running back opportunities in that Denver game. But he is likeliest to settle in this kind of 12 to 15 opportunity range as well. When you think about like now where these players are priced at and that expected workload, are you kind of jumping over chairs here to play these two, or are you kind of looking elsewhere on this slate?
No, I mean, I think what this team has shown in these spots, like I think you have to be interested in the upside of each of these guys, and we'll see like where projected ownership skates, but I definitely do kind of want to prioritize Achane, I think, a little bit more. Not that I still am going to be having Mostert too. We'll see, like I said, where ownership goes, because Mostert's got so much touchdown equity too. I mean, he already has 13 touchdowns. It can't be ignored. And he's a guy that has multiple touchdowns in games, even with Achane playing. So he can't be ignored. I just think the spot's too good. I also think that where these two guys are priced is what is really interesting about this week, because and, a lot of optimals are spitting out Josh Jacobs. I still believe Josh Jacobs is going to be well under-owned versus what the projections show right now. But then you also have Breece Hall at 6,400, who I think is going to be relatively popular. We have Tony Pollard again at 6,600, who's going to be kind of in that conversation again. People keep talking themselves into Aaron Jones every week in that price range. So I think where these two guys are priced is probably the most interesting component of the conversation around them and the projected ownership. because of it's going to be more scattershot in that area. It's going to be more diverse. Gamers have more choices to make in that area. And I outright prefer the Miami Dolphins running backs to all of those other options I named.
Yeah, there's an interesting case to be made for Tony Pollard this
Oh,
week.
yeah.
I know he has not looked good, but in that same kind of pricing tier as well. Like you said, it's kind of a little bit loaded here in this sub 7K pricing tier, which these guys are in. And because, sorry, I'm trying to not cough, because we don't have projectable value, and I've been using that term a lot this season. I define that as value that comes with a median projection,
Yeah.
which is what's going to drive ownership of those kind of sub 4, sub 5K type players on a slate. We don't have a lot of that again this week. So, what does that mean from a theoretical perspective? How are people likely going to build their rosters? It's likely going to be a lot of players from this mid range. And I think running back is where the field is kind of going to go from that sense. So
For sure.
to me, more than even like, I agree, like these Miami backs are most interesting from an upside versus salary versus expected ownership perspective. To me, looking at the slate from a macro lens, I'm kind of looking like, is there somewhere else that I can go on the slate at running back that is going to be different from the field? So that's going to transition us directly to another one of those game environments that I said I don't know if we'll get to, but it's this Chargers and Packers
Yep.
game. There is, you look at the how the Chargers handled their game plan last week. 53% of all the opportunities available in the game for the Chargers went to two players, Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen. And we should expect that. That is more signal than noise. 100%. And you look at the
Absolutely.
supporting cast of the Chargers left behind. Jalen Guyton, who I poo-pooed on earlier, has never been one to earn targets at a high rate. He's more of a field clearer. So he's valuable to this offense from the sense that he's going to be manipulating safeties. He's going to be running downfield. He's going to be opening things up for Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen, but he's never really going to earn targets. Quentin Johnston, we've seen it. We've been here. We've done this. We've been at this rodeo before, and it has not worked out. Continues to be utilized in ways that don't necessarily align with his skill set. And because of that, he has not been able to earn targets. Is that something that's likely to change? I don't think so. Now you're left with the tight ends like Gerald Everett, who is starting to show his age. He has not practiced this week as well yet. And Donald Parham, who is almost too big to play between the 20s because he doesn't really do that nitty gritty tight end stuff very well. He's very, very good at high pointing a football, which is why he has that red zone role. But this is kind of like a timeshare at tight end, and they have very, very clear and defined roles. I mean, you saw Gerald Everett get hurt last week, and they brought in Stone Smart between the 20s. They didn't even want to play Donald Parham at increased rates between the 20s because he doesn't do those nitty gritty tight end things well. He's very, very good at running 10 yards, 8 yards down the field and high pointing a football, but he's not very good at doing the other stuff that tight ends are asked to do in the NFL, which is important. So all that comes together. It's like this team, because of the extreme concentration, very clearly is going to pique my interest on any given slate for the rest of the season. Now you look at the matchup against the Packers, their heavy zone rates, their multitude of injuries in the secondary, the fact that they're just kind of okay against the run. They're not like this terrible run defense that we've kind of gotten used to under Joe Barry. Do you see any upside at cost here for Eckler and Keenan?
Yeah, I mean, I already was on a show earlier, so you can outright Austin Eckler is my favorite play on the slate. For a multitude of reasons. Well, like one, he's just getting more work too than we've seen him get on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, the past two games, 82% of the backfield carries, 79% of the backfield carries. And what he's come back to has just been miserable. Like they face nothing but like onslaught run Ds so far.
Yeah.
Like Cowboys, Chiefs, Bears, Jets. Yes, the Bears are a great run defense.
Yes.
Jets
Like
and
the best, which is crazy.
So we're getting him in a spot where he's got arguably his best matchup. I mean, I don't want to, I know you're a Packers fan, so I don't want to tread lightly here.
Woo.
We just watched the Packers. we just watched the Packers give up 210 rushing yards to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I do definitely think there's some comparative to what he's faced so far. There's an opportunity here for more rushing efficiency than he's been given. And then also we have historically seen with Austin Eckler when this wide receiving unit is banged up to the degree it is right now, and Keenan Allen looks like he's going to play, but is banged up. We have seen him just get utilized in the passing game to a heavier degree, and he already has 7 or more targets in his past 3 games. So, I mean, there's an opportunity here for maybe him to push double-digit targets. We know he also just carries immense touchdown equity in the offense. So I think when you look at the way this slate lines up and to where I don't think people are going to pay up for him in particularly, I mean, he's my favorite play on the slate.
I 100% concur with that. If you look at Austin Eckler's red zone participation this year, he is on a per game basis has the second most valuable red zone role in the entire league, behind only the dude Christian McCaffrey. Yes, like the numbers are lower. The dude missed 3 games earlier this season, so his red zone participation rate is high. He's playing a Packers defense that we know is this like prevent type style, heavy zone rates, heavy cover 2, heavy cover 3. They run some cover 6. They run a ton of nickel and dime. And now they have their top 2 safeties that are on injured reserve. So there's a lot of interesting pieces here. I think a lot of that kind of comes into, I love Austin Eckler. I think you saw me bring up on screen his quarterback in Justin Herbert earlier. I don't think you need to include Justin Herbert because I was exploring or playing Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler together without Herbert. And I think you can do that profitably on this week. We're kind of in the state of this slate of raw points and elite ceiling are kind of harder to come by than on a slate over the past 2 weeks, even that we've seen in recent weeks. So locking in, we can't just like pencil in Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen combo for 60 points, but they have as good a shot as anybody here. Yes, it's going to cost you a pretty penny here because both those guys are priced up, but locking in those points is never a bad thing. I did kind of the same theoretical thought process there last week with the Dallas Cowboys pass offense in just like locking in points in a spot where there could be a lot of uncertainty on the slate. So that's kind of a spot where we can consider doing so. Do you think we need to bring back if you're playing one of these guys here?
No, I don't think not necessarily. I mean, I do think there is some intrigue. Like you could talk yourself into like where the Chargers have been vulnerable, like in giving up big pass plays, and eventually some of these have to be complete, and some of them are. I mean, like the throw Jordan, like you see like why like teams can talk themselves into a guy like Jordan Love, like the throw he made on the Jaden Reed touchdown.
Yeah,
it's a sensational ball, man. Like it's like you can't beat a throw like that. And the Chargers have allowed the most pass plays in the league of 30 or more yards. They're allowing the most receptions to wide receivers on throws 20 or more air yards downfield. So like you can talk yourself into some of these guys. It's just we haven't seen like the immense ceilings here. Like right, even if we get a long touchdown from Christian Watson, if we get the Romeo Doubs, who's second in the NFL in end zone targets, like he has a clear role. But like, can one of these guys push like 20, 25 points? I think is more of a question mark, but I can see yourself talking yourselves into either of those guys.
We got a question here. Hey, gents, talking about signals, not noise, triple stack with bring back the Houston, Arizona game. While we were talking over the last couple of minutes, Noah Brown was ruled out. So I do think that is 100% viable. I think you can do so in ways that the field is not likely to go to. I think you can go CJ Stroud, Devin Singletary, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell. I think you can drop Singletary and throw in Dalton Schultz there. I think there are some very interesting ways to go there. And then you're not worried about the ownership on the Arizona Cardinals pieces. You can play Trey McBride. You can play Marquise Brown. You can play any of those guys because you're different at that point. So yes, good question. I 100% think that is viable. Some of these other spots, we talked about Miami. We talked about the Packers. Let's talk about the Chicago and Detroit game because it carries a high total. I think we got to here. To me, the tendencies of the Detroit Lions, what we've seen from this team now that they're back to relatively full strength, what we've seen kind of aligns poorly with what we expect or how we expect the Chicago Bears to behave. This is a team where they are able and willing to alter their game plan. And this goes back to like the different phases of an NFL football game, like we've talked about previously this year, where it's like your game plan is how you handle the first like quarter and a half. The second half of the second quarter into the end of the third quarter is like phase 2 of an NFL game, and that's where coordinators and head coaches are making their adjustments. They are looking at what has transpired, and they're adjusting and trying to adapt, and that is more like the game management phase. Then you get in the fourth quarter and it's like all bets are off and we're going to go try and win a football game. We have no idea how that's going to happen, but it could get crazy. That's kind of like the three phases. When we look at like phase 1 of the Detroit Lions this season, they have been willing to adapt their offensive game plan to their opponent. That's very interesting because they are now one of the most pass funnel defenses in the league. So, are we going to see a higher emphasis on passing attempts to Jahmyr Gibbs, to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's just an animal? You mentioned it last week, and he just continues to do it. 100 yards or a touchdown in every single game played. He's only paired them together 3 times this season, which is how he's going to unlock that ceiling. But this is a dude who has been the most consistent player in the entire league from a fantasy football perspective. I mean, maybe Josh Allen is up there as well. Until last week, he was at least. Anyway, Amon-Ra St. Brown is the truth. He's the dude. And then you look at Sam Laporta, and an area of the field that the Chicago Bears have struggled to defend is against the tight end. So there's definite upside there. When you flip it and reverse it now with Justin Fields back in action, I mean, we have DJ Moore, who has gone over 100 yards receiving in 3 of 5 fully healthy games from Justin Fields. Is he the clear and away like bring back from this spot? Is he how you're looking to attack this?
Yeah, I think so. I think that when this game is interesting from a couple avenues. I mean, because when we saw Justin Fields on the field, all 5 of the games that he completed in full went over the game total. In the era of unders, and some of that was through his own play being terrible, and some was it being great. Like it was a wide mix of how we got there through that, but. This Lions team, I can't quite put my finger on like this defense. I know they're better than they were last year, but they've still been so opponent driven so far in terms of like counting stats, like what we care about in DFS. I mean, against Lamar Jackson, against Patrick Mahomes, against Justin Herbert, against Geno Smith, like all of those teams got there. And then against Baker Mayfield, against Bryce Young, against Jordan Love, against Jimmy Garoppolo, there was some garbage time for Bryce Young, but like all of those quarterbacks, like they only allowed 4 passing touchdowns to those guys, all of those guys in those games. So it's an interesting dynamic to like kind of play out here, like what wins out. And then defensively, the Bears, like we hinted at, they've been great against the run. The Lions have also been great against the run. Where the Bears have struggled, like you said, though, is guarding running backs and tight ends out of the backfield, or guarding running backs out of the backfield and guarding tight ends. And it's interesting because they paid, their money was allocated this season to linebackers that were supposed to be great in coverage, and that hasn't been it's been their weakness this season. So I actually am looking at it through like a Gibbs Laporta lens as well as you. Amon-Ra, obviously you can always play Amon-Ra. I'm not saying you can't play him, but like the Bears only allowed 1 wide receiver to even reach 70 yards in a game this season. They're playing cover 2 at the second highest rate in the NFL. Amon-Ra St. Brown is averaging, it's a very small sample, but he's averaging less than a yard per out run against cover 2 this season.
So dominated cover 3.
So like, does that lower his ceiling? Is it one of these games where I'm saying Amon-Ra maybe has either like you said, either has the touchdown or he has the 100 yards, or maybe he has like the 8 for 70 game with a touchdown, right? And I don't see like the full on what we saw last week. Like when I was really bullish on him potentially flirting with the 30 PPR points, I think it's more of like a solid Amon-Ra game this week than a lid lifting Amon-Ra St. Brown game this week. And that makes me want to look at I think Laporta is probably the most interesting individual piece on the Lions side, just because of where the Bears are vulnerable, where his pricing is. We know Trey McBride's going to be ultra popular on the slate. So he's the guy I look at. And I think you can just do isolated minis. I think Laporta plus DJ Moore could be relatively interesting just as isolated minis and not fully onslaughting this game. because we saw DJ Moore when Justin Fields played, his usage versus Tyson Bagent due to the style of quarterbacks they have just like was significantly reduced. And he only played a small sample of Justin Fields. Maybe that's something that would have course corrected, but 31% deep target rate with Justin Fields under center versus a 14.3% deep target rate with Tyson Bagent on the field. Like, we're just going to get access to more targets that have upside to get there for fantasy.
Yeah, 100%. I'm kind of in lockstep with you here. I think that I am most interested in Sam Laporta, DJ Moore. I think they can be played together profitably. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is very interesting, in line with that whole discussion that we had about the state of the running back position this week. But yeah, I think DJ Moore can be played by himself as well. There is a valid scenario or outcome, and I was just pulling up Jared Goff here. Where, I mean, this offense, the Lions now are at full strength, and they are less concentrated outside of like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has that bankable and projectable volume. There is a case to be made, like, hey, what if the Lions put up 4 touchdowns on the Bears here, and they all go to different players, and Amon-Ra isn't going over 100 yards? Ooh, I caught it. So yeah, like, there's an interesting case to be made that like a guy like DJ Moore, who is, we know, explosive, we know he carries that upside here with Justin Fields, could be one of the only usable pieces from the spot. So I think he can be played alone at a plus EV fashion. And I think that probably I'm most interested in that Sam Laporta and DJ Moore stack here. Anything else from this one?
No, I mean, yeah, it's one of the ones that you say like, yeah, this one could get there.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the final game that we
I think if
got
it was in Detroit too, we'd feel a lot better. Or it is in Detroit.
It is in Detroit.
Yeah. So that's why we feel better about it, though, it being in Detroit.
Yeah, but even then, like, Jared Goff's splits home road are much more muted this year than they were.
Yeah, and that stuff is always more, they're circumstantially driven, right? And we kind of talked about it last week with Goff, going on the technical road game, but indoors, basically as much of a home game he could have, right? Like playing in that stadium his whole career.
Yeah.
I guess they were outdoors. He was only there for what, 2 years in that stadium in SoFi?
Yeah, because it was built while he was there, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of those things though. That's all that stuff circumstantial. We've seen with Amari too, right? Like Amari Cooper's his home road stuff's been way more muted this year too as well.
Yeah, and he was like the poster child of the home road split slappies.
You can't play Amari Cooper on grass.
Yeah. We digress. Getting back to the last game that we kind of mentioned there with where I think the field is going to go, here is the Seattle and the Rams. To me, these guys have consistently, and we have a fairly large sample to being divisional opponents, have fairly consistently played to a kind of struggle, a divisional struggle fest here between these two spots. That said, there is something to be said about the fact that the Seattle Seahawks are in cover 2 at an extreme rate. There is something to be said about Puka Nakua's numbers against cover 2 and more broadly zone coverages this season. And we saw him start the season 34% targets per route run against zone coverage without Cooper Kupp. That has dropped all the way down to 32% with Cooper Kupp. So he's still like seeing targets at an elite rate against zone coverages this season. Is he a guy kind of in this same like nebulous pricing range that you're interested in this week?
I am for the splits and like the historical, like Sean McVay has had answers for this defense, like consistent, even going back to last year with John Wolford and Baker Mayfield starting in those games. Like they've been good in these games. I think they've covered in 6 straight against the Seahawks. But I do have a little bit of pause just given Seattle at full strength and how they've been with both Reek Woolen and Devin Witherspoon on the field. Like they have been a kind of a matchup I've been earmarking every week for wide receivers where I'm like, ooh, kind of gonna ding these guys a little bit. Yeah. And so so we have 2 pulling elements in there, like where obviously Puka's like his zone splits are so good. And obviously if he's going to be low owned, like definitely mix him into some large field stuff. But this is a defense I respect from like a limiting wide receiver production stance. So, and especially with both of those guys on the field. So I do question how much upside there is there. Like you, I want to talk myself into the pieces in this game, but like I just keep finding things that kind of pull away from it, right? Like I
Yeah,
mean,
same.
Geno Smith got there last week, but it was like kind of in a weird way. Like it was
Yeah, and
all
like, did he?
yeah, it was all yak. It was all yak stuff, which is, it hasn't been his game. Like this season, it felt like more luck boxy, and everyone got there seemed to be like a chalk quarterback on the slate.
Yeah, the thing with Geno is like it's very, very difficult for him to bring someone with him. It's very, very difficult for him. And like we've seen it like historically with DK Metcalf. I mean, he has a very, very low 30 plus point fantasy outing hit rate while he's been with the Seahawks. Tyler
Yep.
Lockett, same thing. And has had numerous multiple touchdown games. And even then, it's hard for him to go over 30 fantasy points. So it's like, yeah, like Geno, that's why I said, like, did he get there last week? It's like Geno did. Who came
Yep.
with him? Like, it's very, very difficult to make these Geno stacks because it's very unlikely for one of these guys to come with him. And that's kind of a nod now to the fact that now you introduce JSN to that equation, and it's even less likely that one of those guys is going to be GPP viable with Geno.
Yeah, and you look at the inverse too. We talked about like the Puka like zone splits. I mean, DK Metcalf has the inverse on the opposite end. Like he's
Yeah.
getting all of his targets against man coverage and none against zone coverage. He's a 40% target rate per route run against man coverage, only 17.6% against zone coverage. Like that's a
Yeah.
seismic difference. There's been like maybe more signal for Lockett stuff, but like you said, Lockett's like one of these guys that like is perpetually underrated from like a season long fantasy value stance. But like from
Yeah.
a DFS perspective, like we don't like we get like a lot of those 90 and a touchdown games where he's like he can maybe be like a 2x value guy, like a 3x guy, but he never like really drops like these games where you're just like, man, I needed Tyler Lockett this week.
Yeah,
He's had very
exactly.
few of those. So it is tough. And like you said, I don't expect this game like this game in general to be like this ultra like high scoring game either, just given what we've seen out of both of these offenses this season. And given like what we've like the respect like I kind of put on the Seattle pass defense.
Yeah. Yeah, all valid, and how I'm seeing that spot as well. The last spot I think we must talk about, and this is kind of in keeping with the theme of this show, searching for ceiling. I'll throw it up on the screen now. Is this San Francisco 49ers Buccaneers game? I think we can't, how do I want to phrase this? We can't understate how good this 49ers team is with Brock Purdy under center and a full supporting cast. So that's the important distinction. We saw this team struggle for 3 games. They scored 17 points for 3 games straight. And that was after scoring 30 plus points in 10 of 11 Brock Purdy regular season starts. Was there a signal in there? And I would say 100% there was. We talked about it last week, and it was the fact that Deebo Samuel was out for those 3 games. He is that pre-snap motion guy. He is that queen chess piece that Kyle Shanahan can kind of move around the formation, that he can keep teams honest with by bringing him into the backfield, by giving him jet sweeps, by making defenses have to account for he and Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield. And oh, by the way, they'll send him on these streaking routes across the field that can gash you up the middle. And we know his yak ability. They're getting him quick outs on the outside as well, with pulling tackles that are even athletic enough to get outside. They have George Kittle that can get outside and throw downfield blocks on these quick screens. So Deebo Samuel's importance to this offense, I think, should not be understated. Now, look at this Tampa Bay team that just filters ad nauseum volume to the air. And it's like we might see a floor of 32, maybe 32, 34 pass attempts for old Brock Purdy here. And that has me extremely interested. Brandon Ayuk is the very clear on paper top option. But are you seeing anything beyond this? Do you think we can go like Brock Purdy doubles here? Is that viable on the slate?
I'm gonna pitch something to you that I tried to pitch on another show, but
Oh, let's
I
go.
mean, is Is Brock Purdy like legit like the one non-mobile quarterback that actually can be played naked, especially this with his pricing? Like
It's very interesting, and I've had those very, very dangerous thoughts myself. Those, like you're in your dark place in your own mind. No, I'm just kidding. I have had those thoughts. I think, and we saw it last week where they succeeded. He almost threw for 300 yards and three, which would have made him highly GPP viable. I played Brock Purdy doubles last week. I ran two.
same.
I ran two 555 milli maker lineups. One was the Dak double, and one was the Brock Purdy double. I had Brock Purdy with CMC and Debo, and it was like, okay, Debo's only score was on the ground, and CMC didn't score for the first time in 18 weeks. That was awesome. But the fact that it was so spread out, three different guys caught touchdowns, I think that is viable. I think that should be reserved for the extremes. And what I mean by the extremes is I think it's viable in cash, and I think it's viable in MME. I think it's less viable in the single entry 3 max small
Yeah.
field GPP type stuff. Just analyzing that situation on the fly with that question. But I am interested, back to this week. I'm very interested in Brock Purdy singles. I'm very interested in Brock Purdy doubles. I think you can build some stuff very, very interestingly. Yeah, that's a word for sure. But I
And
mean,
he's priced below. He's so far priced below Matthew Stafford. He's priced below Geno Smith. He's priced
yeah,
below Trevor Lawrence. Like I don't. Someone has to make it make sense to me.
exactly. And if this is like, are we going to get a streak where CMC doesn't score touchdowns? That would be like mind blown, dude. But if there's an opponent to do it, this could be it, right? I mean,
Yep.
with Vita Vea healthy, this Buccaneers rush defense, we've talked about it so much. He is kind of why, and schematically, how he fits into their defensive scheme is why this team faces such a high pass rate over expectation. So, I mean, if you're talking about Brock Purdy, who has like a mean of like 28 pass attempts this year, could this be a game where we're seeing this like 34, 35, 37 pass attempt spot? I think if ever it's going to happen, it would be this spot. So I'm super interested. One interesting discussion is I have all the skill position players here. It is highly unlikely that both Brandon Ayuk and Debo
Right.
Samuel hit together. Typically, what we're seeing is it's one or the other, and then potentially George Kittle as well. So that is an interesting consideration for this slate. I think you're very, very fine running Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk. I think you're very, very fine adding in George Kittle to that. Something like Ayuk breaks a long one, hits 100 yards, and then George Kittle catches two. There's three touchdowns. And if Brock Purdy is hitting three, and George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk are kind of these downfield plus yak type guys, whereas Debo Samuel is more like short area plus yak type guy in this offense. So if you're searching for ceiling from this spot, I think this is a very, very interesting way to do it. I don't think you need bringbacks. I think you can play that even. You're just basically saying, I'm betting on the San Francisco 49ers to hit 30 points, and then just variance, take me to these guys type thing.
Yeah,
Thoughts on that?
it's just interesting. He's one of these guys that because if this offense is operating the way it's supposed to be operating, he hurts his own volume because of how efficient it is. Like, you can't
Yes.
get the full run out of passing attempts because the pass attempts that they're having are gaining 11 and a half yards. and
Yeah.
he's completed over 70% of his passes in 3 straight games. Like even through like that stretch where everyone was questioning him, he just had the turnovers mixed in. So like he hurts himself. Like the relationship between efficiency and value is like the Brock Purdy conversation. Because you look at these wide receivers, they've combined for in PPR, they've got 4 weeks where they've even scored 20 or more points. And it's 2 games for Ayuk, 2 games for Debo. And we've had two of those 4 with one of the other guys off the field. The Giants game that Debo got there, Ayuk didn't play. And then the Cardinals game that Ayuk got there, Debo dressed, but he had no targets. He had not a target in the game. So like, these guys even getting there when both guys are in the field is hard. And Ayuk's pricing always makes it hard, right? Like there's been no like hall pass. Him and Jalen Waddle, like neither site is like giving you a hall pass on. Like they're like, we could at least know where like the pricing can go on some guys. But even when these guys underperform, they stay like locked on both sites, like over 7K. Then it makes it hard for the to pay for those, because you look at last week, Ayuk's a guy I was invested in last week, and he scores the touchdown and an egregious throw by Brock Purdy, because Brock Purdy is a big vibes quarterback.
What was that, dude? That was pure vibes.
Absolutely egregious play, especially in the opening drive of the game.
I see two guys down there. One of them's got to catch this, right?
But he gets the touchdown, but like it's so hard for him to have these spike weeks, because like when this offense is clicking, like none of these guys get like 12 targets. They never get 14 targets. And it makes it so hard. That's why it's like he's like the one guy, and it's like it isn't just pairing him with Christian McCaffrey and you say, hey, this team's going to score 30 to 35 points. Do I just try to get all the touchdowns that way?
That's what I was trying to do last week, and I failed. But yeah, I think that's viable. That discussion about efficiency, and also going back to something you said about Dalton Schultz and Laramie Tunzel, the presence of Trent Williams in this offense is a big boost to George Kittle. Trent Williams came back 2 weeks ago, and all George Kittle has done in that time frame is put up what? He put up 26.9 and then 23.6 fantasy points. Yeah, the volume isn't going to be there. Yeah, he got there on the back of this weird broken play long touchdown last week. But we want this man running routes. And if he is running routes in a potential spot where, I mean, bringing that all together is like, how is he running routes? It's with Trent Williams on the field and in a pass funnel matchup. And that's kind of what we get this week. So super interested in George Kittle again. Super interested in Brock Purdy. We are over time, but I'm just going to keep gushing about this spot because I think this is kind of one of the premier, like, searching for ceiling hidden upside type spots. If the 49ers are going to score 30 plus, somebody's scoring the touchdowns, and it's less likely than a standard spot to be Christian McCaffrey. We'll just leave it at that. I think that's the best way to put it. Any closing remarks on that spot, man?
No, that's great, man. I love it. I think we covered most of the ground here.
I think we did some work. We did some quick work too after spending 23 minutes on that first game, but it had to be done, guys. Stick with us, man. There were some questions that we didn't get to. I am so sorry. Reach out on Twitter. I'll try and get those answered, and we'll do it that way because we are out of time. You know the drill. This was Searching for Ceiling, presented by 1 Week Season and Sharp Football Analysis. He's Rich. I'm Hilow. You know where to find us. We'll see you guys next week.
1 Week Season.